My father's will reading wasn't what I expected. Then again, nothing about that day was normal, starting with how my stepmother Margaret strutted into the lawyer's office like she was attending a gala rather than her husband's will reading. I sat quietly in the corner of Mr. Patterson's office, my black dress modest and unassuming, watching as my stepmother and her two children, Drew and Sophia, arranged themselves in the premium leather chairs closest to the lawyer's desk. The way they positioned themselves, a united front against me, brought back memories of the last 15 years. I was 12 when my father married Margaret. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and I foolishly hoped Margaret would fill that void. Instead, she made it her mission to ensure I never felt welcome in what had once been my home. "Let's begin," Mr. Patterson said, adjusting his glasses as he opened the thick envelope containing my father's last wishes. I noticed how his eyes flickered toward me with something like sympathy before he started reading. The first few minutes were standard legal language, but then came the part that made my stomach clench. "To my beloved wife Margaret, I leave our family home and all its contents, along with my personal investment portfolio valued at approximately $8 million. Margaret's red lips curved into a satisfied smile. "To my son Drew, I leave my majority stake in Maxwell Industries, including my position as CEO and all voting rights associated with the shares." Drew straightened his designer tie, shooting me a smug look. At 32, he'd been shadowing my father at the company for years, though from what I'd heard, he spent more time in expensive restaurants with clients than actually learning the business. "To my daughter Sophia, I leave my vacation properties in Aspen and Palm Beach, along with my art collection and a trust fund of $5 million. Sophia barely looked up from her phone, as if receiving millions was hardly worth her attention. Then Mr. Patterson cleared his throat, his eyes meeting mine. "And to my daughter Elizabeth." The room went quiet. I could feel their stares, their anticipation of whatever scraps my father had deemed to leave his only biological child. "I leave my collection of books and personal papers." Margaret's laugh cut through the silence like a knife. "Books? Oh, that's perfect." She turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Your father always said you spent too much time reading instead of learning the real business." I sat there, my face carefully blank, even as my heart thundered in my chest. Books. After 27 years, after working my way up through every department of his company while earning my MBA, my father had left me books. "There must be some mistake," I said quietly, looking at Mr. Patterson. He shook his head. "I'm afraid not, Miss Taylor. I reviewed the will with your father multiple times before his passing. These were his final wishes, nothing else." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "No shares in the company? No trust fund?" "You get nothing." Margaret's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Just dusty old books, perfect for the family disappointment." Drew leaned forward, his expensive suit crinkling slightly. "Come on, Liz, you didn't really think Dad would trust you with any real responsibility, did you? Everyone knows you were just playing at being a businesswoman." I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. "Mr. Patterson, is there anything else?" "No, Miss Taylor. That concludes the reading." I nodded, picked up my bag, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Margaret already discussing plans to redecorate the house. "Those awful family photos have to go," she was saying. "Finally, I can make that house truly mine." Just as I reached the door, Sophia called out, "Don't forget to pick up your precious books, Liz. We're having the library converted into a yoga studio next week." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "I'll send someone to collect them." The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. In the elevator, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My father, the man I had spent my entire life trying to please, had effectively written me out of his legacy. But as I walked through the lobby of the high-rise office building, something shifted inside me. The hurt and shock began to crystallize into something harder, something colder, something like determination. They thought the books were worthless. They thought I was just playing at being a businesswoman. They had no idea what I was capable of. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been saving for exactly this kind of moment. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Harrison Capital, David speaking." "David, it's Elizabeth Taylor. Remember that conversation we had at the investors' conference last month? About looking for undervalued companies with potential for hostile takeover?" "Of course." Did you have something in mind? I smiled, thinking of Drew's smug face and Margaret's satisfied smirk. Actually, I do. What do you know about Maxwell Industries? Your father's company? Heard it's been struggling lately. Stock's down 40% this quarter. Word is the new CEO isn't up to the job. The new CEO is my stepbrother, I said, sliding into the back of my car. And he's about to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate me. Can you meet in an hour? I'll have my team ready. I ended the call and instructed my driver to head to my apartment. I needed to change into something more appropriate for what I was about to do. The black dress of a grieving daughter wouldn't do. I needed armor. In my apartment, I stood before my closet, pushing past the conservative suits I'd worn while working at Maxwell Industries. At the back hung a blood-red designer dress and matching blazer I'd bought months ago but never worn. Perfect. As I changed, my mind raced with possibilities. I knew Maxwell Industries inside and out, every strength, every weakness, every skeleton in its corporate closet. I'd spent 15 years learning the business from the ground up, starting as an intern while still in college, working my way through every department. What my father and Margaret had never understood was that books weren't just an escape for me. They were my education. While Drew spent his evenings at clubs and Sophia posted selfies from exotic locations, I studied business strategies, corporate law, and hostile takeover techniques. My father had left me his books and papers. Fine. Among those papers were 15 years of board meeting minutes, confidential memos, and private notes about company weaknesses that my father never thought I'd use against his precious legacy. I styled my hair, applied blood-red lipstick to match my outfit, and took one final look in the mirror. Gone was the quiet, accommodating Elizabeth who had tried so hard to earn her father's approval. In her place stood someone new, someone who was done playing by other people's rules. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Don't forget those books. Everything needs to be out by Friday. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I grabbed my briefcase, the one containing the file I'd been building for months, just in case something like this happened. Inside was every piece of evidence of Drew's mismanagement, every questionable decision, every risky investment that had started Maxwell Industries' downward spiral. Harrison Capital was one of the most aggressive investment firms in the city, known for orchestrating brutal takeovers of vulnerable companies. David Harrison had been trying to get me to join his firm for years, impressed by my quiet competence and deep understanding of corporate strategy. I had always declined, loyal to my father's company, but now I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The car pulled up to Harrison Capital's sleek downtown offices. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the mirrored glass of the building. Red dress, perfectly styled hair, steel in my eyes. I looked exactly like what I was about to become, a woman on the verge of revenge. David met me in the lobby, his eyes widening slightly at my transformation. Elizabeth, you look different. Different is good, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Still interested in adding me to your team? He grinned. Always, but something tells me you're not here just to accept a job offer. No, I agreed as we walked toward the elevator. I'm here to plan a hostile takeover, and I'm going to need every resource your firm has. As the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself a small smile. Margaret and Drew thought they had won. They thought the books were a consolation prize, a final insult from my father. They were about to learn just how dangerous a well-read woman could be. The next 3 months were a masterclass in corporate warfare. I moved into an office at Harrison Capital, working 18-hour days, meticulously executing every phase of our plan. My father's books and papers proved more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Hidden in those dusty pages were details of old contracts, verbal agreements, and handshake deals that had never been properly documented. My father's personal notes revealed vulnerabilities in the company's structure that even the board didn't know existed. Your father was surprisingly careless with his records, David remarked one evening as we pored over the documents. These notes about the Asian subsidiaries alone. I smiled grimly. He never thought anyone would use them against him, and he certainly never thought I'd be the one to do it. We worked in absolute secrecy, using shell companies and proxy buyers to slowly accumulate Maxwell Industries stock. The company's share price kept falling as Drew's mismanagement became more apparent. Each mistake he made pushed the stock lower, making our takeover bid easier. Then came the morning everything changed. I was in my office at Harrison Capital when my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Hey bookworm, guess what? Drew just closed the Anderson merger. Time to admit you were wrong about him being incompetent. I looked up at David, who had just walked in. It's happening. Drew finally made the mistake we've been waiting for. The Anderson merger was exactly what we'd anticipated. Drew had been so desperate to prove himself that he'd overpaid for a failing competitor, draining Maxwell Industries' cash reserves and taking on massive debt. Time for phase two, David asked, grinning. I nodded, picking up my phone to make the calls we'd prepared for. Within hours, our carefully positioned shell companies began dumping Maxwell Industries stock on the market. The sudden selling pressure, combined with news of the overpriced merger, sent the stock price into freefall. By that afternoon, panic had set in. The board called an emergency meeting, which I knew thanks to the mole we'd placed in corporate headquarters months ago. Drew was completely overwhelmed, facing angry shareholders and frightened board members. I waited exactly 3 days, watching as the company's value plummeted and its debt burden became unbearable. Then, through another shell company, we made our move, a hostile takeover bid at a price just high enough to tempt the desperate shareholders. The morning of the confrontation, I dressed carefully in a black designer suit that cost more than Drew's monthly salary. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup flawless. Today, I wasn't just taking back my father's company, I was claiming my place in the business world. The security guard at Maxwell Industries did a double take when I walked in. He'd known me for years as the quiet daughter who worked in middle management. Miss Taylor, I thought you'd left the company. I'm here for the board meeting, I said, sliding my ID card through the reader. I believe they're expecting me. Upstairs, chaos reigned. Board members huddled in groups, whispering urgently. Drew paced the hallway outside the main conference room, his designer suit wrinkled, his face pale with stress. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting. Actually, I said smoothly as the representative of Summit Ventures, the company currently making a bid for controlling interest in Maxwell Industries, I have every right to be here. His face went from pale to ashen. Summit Ventures? That's you. Surprise. I walked past him into the conference room, where the board members were taking their seats. Margaret sat at the far end, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. What is she doing here? Margaret demanded as I took a seat at the head of the table. The board chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Maxwell, Miss Taylor represents Summit Ventures. Given their ownership position and outstanding bid for the company, they have a right to participate. I opened my briefcase and began distributing documents to each board member. Let's discuss the Anderson merger, shall we? Specifically, how the current management overpaid by roughly 40%, while taking on unsustainable debt that puts the entire company at risk. Drew, who had slunk into the room behind me, tried to interrupt. That merger was a strategic necessity. The merger, I continued, speaking over him, was a desperate attempt to appear competent. Instead, it revealed a stunning lack of basic business acumen. For the next hour, I systematically laid out every mistake Drew had made since taking over, every poor decision, every missed opportunity. The board members' faces grew grimmer with each revelation. This is absurd, Margaret finally burst out. You can't just walk in here and... Summit Ventures, I cut in smoothly, currently controls 45% of Maxwell Industries stock. With the support of other major shareholders who have already pledged their votes to us, we will have a controlling interest by the end of the week. I stood up, buttoning my jacket as I surveyed the stunned faces around the table. The choice is simple. Either accept our offer now, or watch the stock price fall even further as we continue our acquisition through other means. The board chairman cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to discuss. No, I said firmly. You have until the end of this meeting to decide. Delay will only make things worse. Drew lunged forward, his face red with rage. This is all because of the will, isn't it? You're just bitter that Dad knew you couldn't handle real responsibility. I turned to him slowly, my voice arctic. No, Drew. This is because you and Margaret spent 15 years convincing my father I was worthless, while you systematically destroyed everything he built. The will was just the final insult. Margaret stood up, her designer outfit suddenly seeming like a cheap costume. You ungrateful little. Mrs. Maxwell, the chairman interrupted. Please sit down. Miss Taylor, what exactly are you proposing? I laid out my terms clearly. Summit Ventures would acquire controlling interest at the offered price. Drew and the current management team would be removed immediately. The board would be restructured. And who exactly would run the company? One of the board members asked. I smiled. I would, of course. After all, I'm the only person in this room who actually understands how it works. The vote took less than 20 minutes. The board, seeing no alternative and impressed by my detailed knowledge of the company, agreed to my terms. Drew stormed out, followed by a weeping Margaret. As the board members filed out, I remained seated, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of what I'd accomplished. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Sophia. You might want to start looking for a new yoga studio. I'll be needing that library back. An hour later, I stood in my father's old office, my office now, looking out over the city. The door opened and David walked in. Magnificent performance, he said, grinning. Want to tell me what's next? I turned from the window, running my hand along the antique desk where my father had once sat, never believing his daughter could take his place. Next, we rebuild. We modernize. We turn Maxwell Industries into everything it could have been if ego and prejudice hadn't gotten in the way. I paused, allowing myself a small smile. And then we go after Margaret's investment portfolio. I hear it's being badly managed. David laughed. Remind me never to get on your bad side. After he left, I sat down at the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was a framed photo I'd seen countless times, my father standing proudly in front of the company logo on the day he founded Maxwell Industries. I placed it carefully in my briefcase. Tomorrow, I hang a new photo, one of me standing in the same spot, but this time the company would be in better hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. You'll regret this. Family should mean something. I typed back a single response. It does. That's why I had to save the company from you. Turning off my phone, I walked to the private bathroom attached to the office and freshened my lipstick. The woman in the mirror looked powerful, confident, unstoppable. Everything my stepfamily had tried to prevent me from becoming. They'd given me books, thinking they were worthless. Instead, those books had given me the knowledge and power to take everything from them. Sometimes I mused, the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about proving every doubt, every dismissal, every cruel word wrong. I was no longer the quiet girl who loved to read. I was Elizabeth Taylor, CEO of Maxwell Industries, and I was just getting started.